Welcome back to the Top Notch Documentaries YouTube channel. On this episode of the Serial Killer series, I shall be covering the case of Sean Vincent Gillis, a serial killer out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I hope you enjoy. The Baton Rouge Homicide Task Force would make an announcement on April the 29th of 2004. They had a serial killer in custody. The man faced 3 first-degree murder charges and 3 ritualistic act charges. This usually involves some sort of mutilation or dismemberment to a victim. He'd been apprehended at his home earlier that day, tyre tracks from his car having been connected to a body disposal site. Alongside the tyre impression evidence, DNA that he'd voluntarily given the day prior had been tested. It matched samples found at all 3 body disposal sites. The investigators suspected that 42-year-old Sean Vincent Gillis was the man they'd been hunting for years. Bodies of murdered women had been piling up in Baton Rouge and the surrounding areas for years. Women had been on high alert since the early 1990s, as an active serial killer had been targeting women in the Baton Rouge area. Police had managed to put Derek Todd Lee behind bars the previous year. He was responsible for many murders of women, and the cases that he was responsible for gained a lot of media attention. The public breathed a sigh of relief at the time. The killer who had been terrorising women had finally been caught. There was a lot less worry circulating about, until the announcement of the arrest of another serial killer of women in 2004. 2 serial killers active in the same area at the same time. Fortunately, both had now been caught, and families of victims could get some answers. Just a quick side note, there are actually another 2 active from the 1990s through until 2006 in Louisiana at the time, with a high body count of over 60 people for all 4, both men and women. If you would like to see me cover some of them cases, just comment below. Sean Vincent Gillis knew that he was done. Having spent the previous evening at home with his girlfriend watching a movie to forget about the stressful day that he had had down at the police station, he'd been approached by 2 detectives who wanted to question him about his whereabouts on February 26th of 2004. He ended up accompanying them to the police station saying, "Let's get this over with," and had spent some time in the interview room being questioned by them. He would deny any involvement in the murder of Donna Bennett Johnston, a sex worker who had been murdered. She had been asphyxiated with a large zip tie, which had been determined at her autopsy. Donna's arm was missing, and a part of her thigh had been cut out and taken by the killer. The investigators were confident that he was her killer. His vehicle was one of 90 vehicles that were fitted with a specific tyre that they'd been looking for. The tyre imprint was connected to Gillis. He was the owner of that brand, model and type of tyre. Investigators also asked Sean about the murders of 2 other women, Catherine Hall and Johnny Mae Williams. Catherine Hall was found by a dead-end sign in January of 1999, and Johnny Mae Williams had been found deceased the previous year in October. Investigators were even more compelled of Sean's guilt upon learning that he had known Johnny Mae Williams. She had done some cleaning at his house a few times and had even been over to hers for a family event one year. Still, the investigators had needed more solid proof of guilt and had requested a voluntary DNA sample. Gillis agreed, and upon providing the sample, soon requested to be driven back home. The investigators accepted. Terry Lemoyne knew that something wasn't right with Sean when he arrived home. She'd moved in with him years prior and was concerned about the police arrival earlier and Sean's meeting with them. She chalked it up to other matters. As she and Sean watched a movie before going to bed, she had no idea that her whole world was about to be turned upside down. It was 1:30 in the morning when Terry was awoken to a SWAT team aiming their weapons at Sean. The situation startling her, the confusion as to what was going on not being comprehended. On securing Sean with cuffs, Terry flipped out. "You've got the wrong house. Don't you know you've been living with a serial killer?" the SWAT member said. Terry was gobsmacked. This couldn't be true. But it definitely was true. Back in front of the investigators and with camera turned on, Sean would begin to detail his hidden life of murder and mayhem. The investigators had been correct. He was the man responsible for the 3 murders, and he was about to confess to a hell of a lot more. In the following days, Sean admitted to more murders. He was proud of his crimes and spoke openly about all the events in graphic detail. One investigator commented on the interview with Sean, saying, "It's bone-chilling to sit in a room with him. He's crazy, a nutcase. He scares you. He wants you to admire what he did. He's very calm, too calm. Scary even for a police officer. He scattered the bones of innocent women across several parishes and was proud of what he had done. The admissions were used to close unsolved murder cases, one of which was a notable cold case from 1994. Anne Bryant was an elderly woman who had been murdered at St. James Place. Anne was by all accounts a great woman. She loved music and art. But when she broke her shoulder, her ability to paint and take care of herself became much more difficult. She needed support and soon moved into the retirement home. Unfortunately, it was just behind Sean's house. Her case had garnered huge amounts of media attention at the time because of the sickening actions and bizarre location for such a gruesome crime. In 1994, there were no barriers at the retirement home. This enabled anyone to walk around the housing wings on site. The lack of security precautions proved to be deadly on the night of March the 21st, 1994. That night was just like any other. Anne would leave her door open so that staff had easy access to help her in case of an emergency and to bring her medication in the morning. Plenty of other residents did the same thing there, just as many people did in Baton Rouge at the time. It was considered a safe place after all. Shrouded in the shadows, Sean attacked Anne Bryant in her bed at around 3 a.m. Her screams went unheard as Sean plunged a knife into her fragile body, stabbing her 47 times. The defenceless 82-year-old Anne Bryant didn't stand a chance. As quickly as Sean had arrived, he vanished from the murder scene, leaving only a shoe print and a blood stain on the carpet. One homicide detective commented on the scene saying, "It was a very calm, isolated scene, confined to the bedroom. I'd never seen a case like this before. The number of stab wounds, the brutality of the murder, the posing of the body. It was a retirement community, a nice area. The positioning of the body was alarming to me. This was not a typical murder. You're in shock when you see something like this." Investigators were stunned that Anne Bryant, a cold case that they'd been familiar with, was one of Sean's victims. As they continued to listen to the depraved killer, a search of Sean's home was turning up even more damning evidence. And as the confessions turned up more details, the investigators kept turning up to Sean's house, where Terry was now living alone. Some of the seized items included, but are not limited to, a red and black machete, a a black-handled hacksaw missing the blade, a silver hacksaw missing the blade, 14 condoms, 3 photos of Johnny May Williams, 3 zip ties, books with some interesting titles being The Son of Sam, Silence of the Lambs, The Hillside Stranglers, Alone with the Devil, and Cops and Robbers, 7 saws, an axe, 3 kitchen knives, later proved to be used in some dismemberment, 8 newspaper articles about a Derek Todd Lee victim, computer equipment. The search would turn up even more incriminating evidence when it came to the digital forensic search. Sean loved to spend time on Angel. Yes, he had named his computer. He was addicted. That was an understatement. Terry often found him online. He had a lot of Christmas music and had a wide array of music stored on the computer. Sean had lots of photos of actress Christina Applegate on the computer, was obsessed with pornography like most sexually motivated serial murderers. But his choice of adult content was far from normal. He had folders labelled with titles like Fake Dead, Various Dead, Extra Dead, Russian Necro, and Beheadings and Hangings. You get the picture. Other folders included ones on Derek Todd Lee and the Manson murders, but the most incriminating evidence was not any of this. It was the photographs of some of his murder victims. There were 45 pictures of Donna Bennett Johnston. She'd been posed. One photo showed her in the trunk, with Sean's license plate being slightly visible in the background. Her fingernail was soon found in his car trunk. Sean continued talking. He talked way too much about the details of the murders. I won't get into all the specifics, but there are some common themes when it comes to the crimes. Sean would pick up a working girl and drive to a remote area. He admitted to singing along to the radio with Joyce Williams, one of the victims, during the drive over to her murder location. Once at a remote location, services were exchanged, and then Sean would attempt to slip a zip tie around the woman's neck. The women had no reason to suspect that Sean, with his harmless demeanour, would turn into a ruthless monster. On a few of the murders, victims managed to escape Sean's clutches, only to be chased down and viciously beaten to death with either fists or objects at the scene. On researching the backgrounds of the women, it is sad to hear about the events that took place. One of the women, Marilyn Nevels, was never even reported missing. She had no family. Sean beat Marilyn to death with a metal bar and used a car wash hose to wash the blood from her body. Blood on his clothing. He was asked at a gas station if he'd gotten the upper hand. "You should see the other guy," he responded. He took Marilyn's body back to his house and showered with her corpse. Like many of Sean's victims, the public and media didn't seem to care about the nameless street girls whose futures had been tarnished because of past trauma and drug use. This is likely a reason as to why Sean targeted them to begin with. Sean enjoyed cruising the streets and picking up the women. Some of them couldn't wait to get into my car, he said. Catherine Hall had been his second victim, 5 years after he had murdered Anne Bryan. She had died by exsanguination. A zip tie had been used, but a stab wound to Catherine's neck had hit the jugular vein. Sean's pubic hair matched him to her murder. As the years moved on, Sean admitted to investigators that the sick thoughts only grew as he became more obsessed with death and dismembering his victims. He was a picky killer when it came to the victims. He liked women close to his own age or older. He once picked up a 16-year-old girl and gave her a speech about the dangers of the streets. He advised her to make something of her life before deciding that she wasn't the one. Sean had started out as being normal to everyone around him. He attended Catholic school and was described as being smart and very helpful to others. He had a fantastic sense of humour, one friend mentioned. He would collect books for his mother, and this behaviour continued well into his adulthood. Evidently it evolved into collecting much more sinister things later on. There were some strange behaviours that Sean exhibited though. He was prone to moments of anger, would drink heavily, and hadn't seemed to have grown up. He lived at home, the house belonging to his mother. She paid the mortgage, and he didn't really do a whole lot. He worked on and off when Terry, his girlfriend, forced him to, but seemed to lack any real motivation other than to consume entertainment online. When a hurricane hit in 1992, the house flooded. Sean just lit a joint and stayed fixated on his computer. A neighbour made a comment that she never trusted Sean, even as a youngster. There was just something about him. Sean won't be getting released anytime soon. By this point, he has admitted to killing 8 women in excruciating detail, committing dismemberment, necrophilia, and even cannibalism. He ate a victim's nipple and removed victims' limbs for sexual gratification. He is truly a twisted killer. In prison, Sean turned to religion to try to redeem his actions. However, it's too late for Sean Vincent Gillis to turn back time and undo his actions, which have resulted in plenty of pain and despair to this very day. Thanks for watching the video. What are your thoughts on this case? Be sure to leave them below. As always, thanks for watching.